You are now listening to Out of the Blank.
Well, welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Michael Wall.
Yeah, thanks. How's it going?
Michael, tell me a little bit about yourself and what do you do professionally?
Yeah, sure. So I guess my day job, I'm a patient experience manager with a hospital here in West Virginia. They've got 4 locations, and I spend most of my time talking with patients. So, I go in to make sure that their stay is as good as it can possibly be. If there's any issues with any part of the stay, whatever it is, doctors, nurses, cleanliness of the room, food, whatever it is, I take care of that problem for them and kind of straighten that out. So I get to do that during the day. I spent 20 years, running call centers and doing call center management, and that was great. But wanted to try something a little different where I had a little more control of the time, and this allows me to, kind of schedule my own time and plan my day. So that's my day job. The fun part is, I've got a website called Meisterkhan that my son and I started 6 years ago, and it's a pop culture geek site. And we did it as a way that we could share, all the nerdy stuff that we both love. And, we get on there and post about all kinds of stuff. We have a great time with it. Over time, as my son got older, he's in college now, he's going into film editing, and he wanted to start a podcast. So we did that. He tried it with a few friends at first, and as with podcasting, one of the toughest things is consistency, and he just couldn't get a partner that would consistently put out a product with him. So he asked me to do it, and we had very low expectations for that to do well, and it's far exceeded what we were expecting. So the show's called Too Opinionated. We post at least once a week on, kind of geek related topics, like we're going to see Dr. Sleep tonight. So we'll be posting on that Saturday and kind of talking through
You're giving me a lot of information. You gotta let me cut in here. I gotta ask so many questions already. Okay.
Yeah. It's okay. Okay. Just shut me up when you're ready.
Day job. Okay, so you work in the hospitality kind of field of being in a hospital, more like dealing with the patients and making sure their stay is okay. So, like, where were you when I needed a pudding cup when I was laying in a hospital bed? Because I'm telling you, there were so many times I needed my experience, at least a little bit more comfort. It felt like I was waiting in this gown in a cold ass room. I'm like, they're like, take your pants off. Like, why do I have to take my pants off for an ear infection? Like, I don't understand.
Well, and the funny part about this job is 9 times out of 10, that's what it is. It's something really minor. They want an extra snack, or maybe the trash didn't get picked up. It's something that's really easy to take care of. And most of the time, with any field, where you're dealing with the public, people just want to be heard. So I just give them that ear, and it allows me to offer a little bit of assistance. And it's, it's the first time, honestly, it's the first time in my career that I've never had anybody reporting to me. And that has been awesome. Nothing against managing people, but I can wear you out at times.
It's definitely a lot of especially when it comes to a hospital, there's a comfortability factor that is needed because you're in a very vulnerable stage in life. I think usually when you're in a hospital, it's not for something minor. It's usually for something, usually a little bit serious, or you're trying to stop something from maybe becoming serious. We can talk about ear infections, but I'm talking about breaks. I'm talking about,
That's right.
someone getting scans. Just walking into a hospital and knowing that you're not 100%, you're already in the really messed up mindset. So your job is
That's
very
exactly
important
right.
to make sure that people can be able to handle the stress that is kind of piling up from being just in that environment. I mean, if they're not, a lot of hospitals aren't very comfortable walking in. I mean, they're not something you're happy to be there for. You know what I mean? Usually when you're there, unless it's like, shout out to you for having a new grandbaby on the way. Like, that's a perfect reason to be in there, but you're still scared. You still need that comfort. You want to know that everything's going to be okay, and you're excited, but at the same time, you're in a vulnerable state.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. That part of what I do is I train the incoming new staff for the hospital, and that's exactly the point I try to make. If a person is in the hospital, they're already having a way worse day than what you're having, and they need that kind of soft touch and a little bit of compassion, and you have to have a little bit of a thick skin, because sometimes it can come out in a different way when you're dealing with somebody that's sick or hurt. They're not always going to be pleasant, and you just have to kind of let that roll off and be there to help. So that's a really good point.
Now, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the medical field. I have a couple of friends that are involved into the nursing program, and they talk about that in the year
Yeah.
2020, it's going to be the biggest hit, basically a nursing shortage. Right now, they're kind of dealing with it mostly on a lot of hospitals are dealing with a lot of patients. So doctors, instead of having, let's say, the average patient of maybe 6 or 7 patients a day, they have average now of like 9 to 10. And it creates a distance between the relationship between a doctor and patient that I believe is needed. A lot of the times that's what a nurse is there for. Are you allergic to anything? Oh, what's your cholesterol level? Do you smoke? Do you drink? All these types of questions. But honestly, getting to know the person on a more deeper level. When it comes to the physical aspect of getting hurt, that is a big part of diagnosing what the problem is. But a lot of it is also mentality and emotion as well. My buddy who is trying to be a registered nurse in Pennsylvania talks about how like there's going to be a nursing shortage in 2019. It's kind of already hit, but going into 2020, there's going to be a large amount of nurses that are going to be out of the way, mostly because it's not seen as cared for as a higher job prospect, at least to the new ages nowadays. Back then, let's say the baby boomers or people that, that was the first thing they would sign up for, try and get an education for.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, and we're seeing that already. And the biggest issue with it is what happens when you're short staffed is people get overworked really quickly, and it starts affecting their ability to adequately take care of each individual person. And then people, when you're tired, mistakes are made. You get a little grumpy, and it can cause just all kinds of problems. So yeah, it's definitely something that at least locally at the hospitals, it's talked about a lot, and that's why I think you see a lot of hospitals that will sponsor people to go through school, and kind of you'll see some of those agreements. They'll pay for the schooling, and then the person agrees to work for the hospital for 2 years or whatever it is. And I think you're going to see more and more of that as a way to try to incentivize younger people to come in.
Well, it really brings in a bigger opportunity, not really about opportunity, but a more kind of credit to you in a way, because your job is so much more important now than it has ever been, on the prospect that people want this relationship with their doctor. They want to be able to know that the person is treating them, find out where they went to school, find out like, hey, let's get to know each other before you start prodding me with needles and stuff. You know what I mean? And it's a very uncomfortable situation when the doctor just walks in and reads off your chart and doesn't really give up that chance for a relationship. It's not his fault. It's the matter of fact that they're completely understaffed. It makes it, you're putting unrealistic expectations on people.
Well, you are, and it's if you we do hospital surveys, and the thing that comes back most is people want time. They want time with the doctor to understand exactly what's going on with them, and that's the number one issue. Is they say that there's just a lack of explanation, lack of time. And that's the byproduct. When you're rushing to get to the next patient, the bedside manner goes, you don't take the time with each individual. So it's, when you're short on that side of it, it causes all kinds of problems.
What do you find the biggest problem is with your job in particular? Do you find that there's just some people that want more and more and more, or do you feel like, because I know people can tend to get greedy. I know if you put a pudding cup in front of me and I devour it in 2 minutes, I'm going to be asking for more pudding cups. So I'm just trying to see, like, what is the biggest job problem you face?
I've been really lucky because the majority of the people I talk to every day, and I'll see 50, 60 different people a day. They're great. They're terrific. They're because if you're in the hospital, I know me in particular. If I'm in the hospital, I don't want people coming in my room. I don't want somebody coming and asking me questions and be bothered. So that's you want to be kind of left alone, but not everybody's like that. Most of the people I deal with, they're very very appreciative of someone coming in and just asking how they're doing. It's really great. Now the issue, the one that I run into, and it's not a big one, it's just kind of part of it, is it's usually on the dietary side. So you talked about pudding. A lot of times you'll hear people say hospital food is not very good, when it's actually not that bad. The issue is you've got somebody with a health condition, so they're not allowed to have salt, or they're not, they're on a low fat, or maybe they're on a gluten-free diet. So their food tends to be very bland. And that's usually the issue we have, is trying to explain that it's a dietary requirement, and that's why the food is the way that it is. Because people, they, even in the hospital, they want their comfort food.
Yeah, well, a lot of people, they see stuff off TV too, where hospital food is crap, that, stereotype. I mean, when I went to this PRMC up in Salisbury, I was visiting somebody, and I was like, man, I'm hungry. I'm going to, my mom's like, you want to go get some like food from the lunchroom or something? I'm like, what do they have? Like a banana or something? Like, that's it. Like, there's no good food there. I walked down there. They had like tuna melts. They had a bunch of stuff. I'm like, holy shit, am I at Panera Bread right now? Like, what is?
Yeah. Well, and that's it. We've, all of the cooks in the hospital are they're chefs. They've run their own restaurants as went to school to be chefs, and then the hospital has hired them on over here. So they know what they're doing. The food, especially if you don't have any dietary restrictions, or if you're buying in the cafeteria, really good. It's high quality.
I'll never forget my dad, when he got his gallbladder taken out, he couldn't eat anything. So he was eating ice chips, which is basically just ice, and you just chew it.
Yeah.
I guess that's supposed to trick your brain or whatever. And so they messed up his chart. After his surgery, he could actually eat. I think it was a few hours later, and they totally just didn't even read it. They told me couldn't eat for like another day. So it was like 2:00 in the morning, and he tells me his doctor walks in just to check his chart, see if everything's okay. And he's like, wait a minute, when's the last time you ate? And my dad's like, I haven't eaten in like 3 days, man. Like, I'm starving now. Nothing but fucking ice chips. And the doctor has like this dinner or snack. My dad said it was literally a ham sandwich. And like the doctor was like, it was in a bag right in his hand and everything. And my dad goes, so wait, I can eat? And the doctor goes, yeah, but the cafeteria is closed. You have to wait. And he's like, give me part of your sandwich. And they just sat there and had a sandwich together.
That's great.
And he was,
that's terrific.
that's what I think is more needed for people, especially nowadays. You know, given your last ham sandwich, I don't know. I know very few people that will do that for anybody, but that's the type of
Right.
relationship you want to have with your doctor. You know what I mean? Like
That's exactly right.
they messed up. They didn't read his chart, but then he made up for it by sitting down and having like, you know, a snack with my dad. Like he was just, you know, like he understood that my dad wanted food right then and there. And unless someone's driving to Arby's or something down the road, then, you know, he's without food. But it's about really caring and having a sense of empathy that it seems like the world is lacking a little bit more in a way. And especially in a hospital, that is where it's definitely needed, but understanding the strain of it all too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a really good point. And, you know, it's something that, you know, it should be the natural response, you know, to respond with empathy and caring. But we've gotten away from that. And it's, you know, people are much more guarded, I think, nowadays than they used to be. And that, you know, it's just something that, you know, it's a learned skill. You know, we talk about it a lot when we're dealing with housekeeping and nursing and food and nutrition. You know, it's a learned skill, and you know, you don't want to get so tied up in your job that you forget to take a few seconds and recognize that, you know, you're actually dealing with a person that may be having a bigger issue than you're having for the day.
What would you suggest would be some fixes to kind of help out, I guess, the kind of the medical industry when it comes to a more of a hospitality aspect, besides getting more nurses and getting better staff and maybe a little bit more money in the budget? Like, what are things that like you try to do on your everyday job to make at least your job a little bit like basically do your duty, you know, like make it more comfortable for
Right.
people?
Well, it's already happening, and you know, hospitals are starting to recognize that. You know, it's no longer where you only have a few places that you can go for medical care. You know, hospitals are like anything else. They're competing for patients. And we operate, you know, nationally on something that's called a HCAP score. And it's just a survey score that you when you leave the hospital, you get a survey a couple weeks after you get home. It's going to ask you about everything that happens at the hospital. Doctors, nurses, cleanliness, food, staff, everything. And you're going to fill that survey out. And then people can go online and actually check to see how their hospital is doing as far as taking care of patients compared to the national average, compared to other local hospitals. And government gives money based on those scores. They'll give grants, they'll give funding, or they could even penalize if the scores are low enough. So hospitals are recognizing that, and they're making the changes, you know, to improve in those relations so that those scores go up because they're accountable for that now. And I think that's been the biggest change. That's something that is definitely starting to improve the situation. I mean, obviously staffing is important. If you don't have the staff, it's difficult to do anything that you want to do. But I think what you're seeing more of is you're seeing less of the overbooking with doctors. You know, a lot of times they're just overbooked and they just don't have the time to spend, you know, with patients. So as they see less patients, you start to get a little extra time. That improves that situation a little bit. And, you know, we talk a lot about just touches, you know, just patient touches. So we want to make sure that nurses and doctors are rounding on the patients. We'll make sure that, you know, if you're in housekeeping, that you're going into that room 3 or 4 times a day. And it's, you know, we've shown that those extra touches will improve patient satisfaction. And then, you know, that in turn tends to improve the scores, helps the hospital, and it's kind of a circle. But all that stuff being online where you can go and take a look to see how your hospital is actually doing, I mean, that's helped a ton.
Yeah, having more sense of accountability to your actions.
Right.
It's going to cause people to promote better behavior. It's kind of what China's doing right now with social credit. I don't know if you know a whole lot about that, but you're basically you're basically judged on your actions in China. So if you jaywalk, if you do these types of things, they'll blast you out in front of public, let you know, like, this guy's a bad person. He jaywalks, doesn't pay back his debts. And that can stop you from getting a house. That can stop your kids from going to a good school. And, yeah, it's crazy because, like, you're starting, like, people are talking about maybe trying that here. And I was like, that's like, you're trying to, I can see the good part about it. You're trying to incentivize people like, hey, if you do good things, you get good things. But if you do bad, then you get treated bad for your actions. But man, it's going to create what I call like a snitch society where, like, you could call the police right now and say, like, at 2:00 in the morning that I'm mowing my lawn, and they'll come over to me. And if they catch me, like, I'm actually mowing my lawn and I do it once, you can keep calling it in over and over and over again. And even when I'm not doing it, if I'm sleeping, they just won't trust me anymore. So then I won't be able to get a house.
Yeah. I can see a lot of, seems like a lot of rights violations would come along with that. I mean, in theory, maybe that's a decent idea, but I don't know. That seems that seems like a big step. And do you really want that much government involvement?
That's what I'm saying. It's like a good concept. I get the idea behind it, but it would never work with the way people act today. Like, more people are going to be like, Jim was mowing his lawn at 2:00 in the morning. Jim's like in Africa or something on vacation. And they're just like, all right, well, Jim's going to lose his house now. It's like, whoa. What happened? He's like,
yeah.
I just wanted a better view because your house is nicer. It's like, okay. Remember when you didn't return my weed whacker? He loses his house. Well, how did you go off to diving into your own website? Like, what's with the name Meisterkhan? Sounds like a German great Khan.
Well, so I got to go back a ways. So it's, when I was probably early teenager, we used to watch this show, and you've probably seen it. It's one of the claymation Christmas specials. I think it's A Year Without Santa Claus. But you've got Burgermeister.
Oh my God, I'm getting flashbacks right now.
Yeah.
My dad would always throw these on.
Yeah, that's it. So when we were teenagers, we would whatever competition we were competing in, whatever it was, the winner we started calling the Meister. That was the winner. So we would, if we were doing dunk competitions or board games, whatever it was, we could call the Meister. So that always just kind of stuck. That's where the Meister part comes from. The con part is I've just always been a big fan of Star Trek. So it's from Wrath of Khan.
Please educate me more on Star Trek, because I'm telling you, I'm a fan of Star Wars and I know nothing about Star Trek. I've talked to a guy who does a Star Trek podcast. Didn't go so well at first. We're hoping to redo it again. Mostly he's like, maybe you should do some research on some Star Trek. He's not wrong, because I know nothing about this show. All I know is, like, I guess it's more of like, if he posed it as if people got their shit together and actually had the time to advance into space with, like, diplomacy and all the things that Star Trek uses, which I can see is a little bit more realistic than what Star Wars kind of plays, where they got all this alien interconnectional stuff. Seems like we'd be more at like a conflict with, like, dealing with a lot more diplomacy than Star Wars at least talks about.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good way to describe it. I am too. I've been a Star Wars fan from the beginning, so that's always been a huge part. But I was a big fan of William Shatner with the original Star Trek, and then in the '80s they came out with Next Generation, and you had Patrick Stewart playing the captain, and it's always been a constant. I turned 50 this year, and Star Trek's been there the whole time. There's always been something there, and the majority of it is pretty high quality stuff. So yeah, if you haven't checked out Star Trek, you definitely should check it out, because it's really good, and a good way to do it. I'll give you one. There's a new one out on CBS streaming called Star Trek Discovery, and in the timeline, it takes place 10 years before the original William Shatner Star Trek. So it's a good, if you've never watched it before, that's a good one to start with because chronologically, it's the earliest, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think when I was talking to this guy about Star Trek, he was telling me that it's broken a lot of boundaries, especially with George Takei. Like a lot of people don't know he was in an internment camp, and they were the first show to put on a African American woman before everybody else did. A lot of people weren't,
Well, they had the first interracial kiss, and a lot of that stuff was well ahead of its time. Women in positions of authority, all of that.
I think it's it looks like an amazing show. I guess I gotta dive into it now. I can't keep talking shit on it. But what you call you got Meisterkhan. So this is like a kind of this generation's GOAT. I don't know if you've ever heard of what that is.
Yeah. So is that your greatest of all time?
Yeah. So a lot of people be like, he's the GOAT. He's the GOAT. That's what it was.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. That's exactly what. Yeah, that's exactly it. So that would be that was what we would use instead of GOAT.
Dude, you threw me through a loop with that Meister thing, man. I'm like, now all I'm thinking is this one scene where it's like this, I guess it's Rudolph as a baby and he's learning how to walk. And then there's just this song in the background where it's like, you got to put one foot in front.
Oh yeah. One foot in front of the other. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's the reason that I started, the page and a website is, I was a comic book owner back in the 90s. I grew up, that's all I ever wanted to do was just run a comic book business. So when I was in college, I opened a store and did that, for years. And I got out of it when Marvel Comics, this was in 1996, they went bankrupt. And I thought, well, it's over. Comic books are done. Obviously. Marvel came back from that.
There's always going to be a place for nerd culture. You see,
that's right.
Do you question how popular it is now just because a lot of people are just seeing the movies and not actually reading the comic books? Like, do you feel offended as a fan or are you happy that there's more people looking into it?
I always say I'm kind of a nerd snob, because I was doing all this stuff, way back, but it's really a great time to be a nerd because even you can kind of choose your level of nerdiness. You can be a casual fan and still enjoy, which allows, everybody to have the conversation about it. Or, you can still be kind of old school like I am and really be able to dive into the different things and talk about. So I think that stuff's pretty good. So comic book store, I closed that down, always missed it. I've never gotten over just having that kind of place where I could interact with people that enjoyed the same things that I did.
Did you just stick on the Marvel culture or did you stick on to everything kind of involved into just comics in general?
Well, we covered every, we had all of it, all the independents, DC, I mean, whatever you could think of. And we did ball cards. We did Dungeons and Dragons. We did Magic the Gathering. We had, huge displays of, the 70s Star Wars toys. Back then when it first opened, the new, the prequels hadn't come out yet. And we would trade comic books for, the old Kenner Star Wars toys and then resell them and stuff. So we did really well with that. But yeah, I always missed it when I got out of it, which is the reason I started the page up, Meisterkhan. And I thought, well, I need a name that's going to make it different from just every other page that's called Geek something. So we went Meisterkhan, and then that, eventually has led us to podcasting too.
You definitely picked an original name. I'll tell you that.
I've never run across it. That's the only one I've ever seen.
I'm surprised Out of the Blank wasn't taken when I did it. I was like, wait a minute, this isn't a thing? Nobody ever thought of this?
Yeah. No, yours came right up when I looked for it.
It
came right up.
I love it because people always ask, like, send a link. I'm like, just click on the page, man. Like, just type it in. That's it. I hate it. I hate saying that because I do feel like a bit of a jerk. But I'm like, even when I'm a guest appearance on a show, I'm just like, it's out of the blank. Look it up. They're like, but how are we gonna, like, what's your platform? Like, where are you located? I'm like, you gotta
Right.
look it up. And so they end up doing the plug for me. And I'm like, man, we have too many things handed to us in this world. If you can't search it up, then I don't know what to tell you. I mean, is
That's
it
right.
that hard to Google it?
No, stuff comes, that's, I've got a daughter in marketing. She helped us, kind of set that up where, if you put in Meisterkhan, it brings all that stuff up on Google, and that's been pretty easy. We've grown so fast. It's taken us a while to kind of catch up with it because, we're learning as we go. So we usually don't know that we're screwing something up until we screw it up, and then we'll kind of learn from it and go from there. And we're kind of operating under the fact that nobody's going to be listening, so we got time, and that hasn't been the case. It's almost like we're gaining listeners because they kind of enjoy listening to us mess it up and fumble around and just have fun with it.
Well, it's fun to be, like, not fully Hollywood. I think a lot of things nowadays, like what I try and do with the podcast, I tell them it's real conversation. If you want to drop a cuss word, you want to drop whatever, go ahead and feel free to, because I curse in my everyday life. I'm not
Right.
going to stop you from being the original person you are. I'm not here to do a character act. Like, I started noticing a lot of times now people do characters on podcasts and stuff, and it's good. It works for them, but it just doesn't work for me. I've always been who I am and been able to express myself individually. Like
Yeah.
like I kind of wanted to go back to the question when I asked you about, like, with all these newer people kind of getting hooked on what they call nerd culture and wearing all these
Yeah.
things, being like a trend. The weird thing was originality. There are people that are just doing it because it's a trend. Like, I'm original, okay? Like, everything I do is because I want to do it. I don't do it because some social trend or something. I don't wear, like, oh, I'm going to wear black glasses with no lenses in it because that's the hipster thing to do. No, I'm like,
Right.
I'm going to wear a Punisher t-shirt if I want to wear a Punisher t-shirt. I'll wear a fucking Raisin Bran t-shirt. I'll rep that all day. Mostly Honey Smacks. That's my favorite cereal. But, like, I'm all about being myself and expressing myself, because when you stop expressing yourself, the creativity that makes you a unique person is gone.
Yeah. No, I got exactly what you're saying. You're talking about kind of bandwagon people that kind of
Which
just
you
jump
see
in
nowadays.
last minute.
Yeah, everybody's
Yeah,
walking
you
around
do.
with like a superhero T-shirt or something. I'm like, back in the day, like, you look at people that are wearing superhero and Star Wars clothing, and you're like, you would have beat up people that liked that stuff back in the day.
Yeah.
Like, you
Yeah,
don't.
it is interesting to see the changes over the last 20 years or so, where it's really become so mainstream. And before, 90% of that stuff was male. There just wasn't any women that were really into that stuff. And now it's probably 50-50 now.
What was your first comic book that you ever got?
Well, so the first, I've still got it. It was a Richie Rich Diamonds comic, and then the second one was a Richie Rich and Casper, and the first superhero comic that I got was a king size spectacular Spider-Man annual. So those were the first ones, when that was back in the 70s.
A couple of my friends make fun of me because I'll take them thrift shopping or something, because they're just like, what do you mean thrift stores aren't cool? I'm like, bro, you can get anything for like $1 at a thrift store. Then they end up having a great time. So I go in there getting old vinyl records that I put up on my wall. So I have a whole wall filled with vinyl records. And then I'm buying things like comic books and all these like interesting things. And I have a comic book app on my phone. But my first comic book I ever got was, I went with my grandmom and my brother down to this, like, this is back in the day when they sold like Japanese knockoffs of stuff.
Yeah.
But I guess you would call it, if it's a comic book, probably the original. So we got like this 2000 page comic book for like $2, but it was you could not understand a single word or what was going on. Like I'd be reading it and I'm like, I don't understand this language. I'm like flipping through it. And then I'm seeing a dude get his head sliced off and I'm like, all right, we got to go back. We got to go back. What the hell did I miss dialogue here? And it was always so interesting. And I showed my dad it when I got back from my grandparents' house, and I was probably like 7 or 8. And he's like, that's your first comic book? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, oh man, I should have showed you something way better than that. And I'm like, I just didn't understand what was going on. And he goes, and my dad's a big Kiss fan. I mean, 100% owns everything Kiss related. My dad, he's in a Kiss tribute band called Rock Bottom. So
cool.
I've always known my dad as Peter Criss, because when I was a kid, I would see him play Ram's Head Live and all these like popular venues and stuff like as Kiss.
That's awesome.
And he goes, check this out. Fucking Kiss comic book, Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, which they also made a movie on. And he's like,
oh yeah,
this. And he starts showing me all his comic books of Kiss. And I'm like, this is so awesome. Like, cause they put this, Gene Simmons is known as the Demon. And they would have him like actually have demon abilities, like breathing like fire and like actually having like this, like blood.
Oh yeah, I remember it.
Oh, dude, it was so amazing. And then like I bought my own one that I purchased with my money, probably when like I was 11 years old. I probably just got it from like mowing the lawn, or like was like, hey, can I borrow like $10? You're like, why do you need $10? You're like 11 years old. What are you gonna do with $10? I was like, I don't know. So I went to the store and I bought a Spawn comic.
Oh yeah.
So I had no idea. I was diving into the dark shit before the fun, like interesting superhero stuff. I was dealing with like people like getting burned alive and stuff.
I got you. I'll give you a good Todd McFarlane story. Todd McFarlane, who created Spawn. So when he before he did Spawn, he was starting to write Amazing Spider-Man. But he hadn't done it yet. So he was working on a little comic for DC called Infinity Inc. So he was not known. And I went to this back when I had the store, I went to a convention and they had him sitting next to John Byrne. And John Byrne at the time was doing X-Men. Everybody knew who John Byrne was. So the line to get, something autographed with John Byrne was out the door. I mean, it was just out the door. Todd McFarlane sitting there, nobody knew who he was. He's by himself. So I went and started talking with him, had him sign a few things. Nobody else is coming up, so we just kept talking. And eventually, I ended up spending the whole day hanging out with Todd McFarlane. He must have signed 100 of books that I had. And then within 6 months after that, he started doing Amazing Spider-Man and became like the biggest comic book guy on the planet, and then after that was Spawn, and, he was huge, but I always got a kick out of that. At that time he was still a nobody. So, but that's when I got the opportunity to spend some time with him. Great guy.
Now I have to ask you this. When you look at DC and when you look at Marvel, which one are you more of a fan of? Or are you a fan of both?
I was always a Marvel guy growing up, with the exception of, I was a big Teen Titans fan. With
yes, I love that show as a kid, man. And I see the one they have now, and I'm like, damn, it changed so much. The original, like, I like the Japanese style, like, graphics rather than
it was cool. I watched that with both of my kids growing up, and they they loved it. And we talk about it all the time. My son and I talk about that all the time, because there's always rumors that show's coming back. And they brought Young Justice back. They haven't brought that. They brought Tiny Titans.
Well, they brought Teen Titans Go, which is like a more cartoon animated version on Cartoon Network. And it's like, man, like all they're doing
is not the same.
Yeah, they're cracking fart jokes. Like, where's the seriousness? Where was the, like somebody, like you felt emotion when like they had Cyborg, when they had the rings. I don't know if you remember that episode when he was infiltrating the hive. He had the rings on his hand that turned him back to human, and it like brought back like his accident and why he lost all his pieces and that turmoil that he was going through. I was like, bro, like I'm like 12 years old. This is hitting me hard right now. Like it was like watching Old Yeller all over again. I wanted to pull out a box of tissues.
It was a really well done show, for sure. But that was always kind of my exception growing up. Otherwise I was more into Marvel. And I think, if you look at it, it's funny because Marvel does so much better on the movie side than DC does, but DC puts out, quality animation. If you watch their cartoon movies, that type of thing, probably ahead of what Marvel does, but Marvel just kills them on the movie side.
Well, who's your favorite Marvel superhero?
I had a couple growing up. I was a big Spider-Man fan. I loved the Thing, and I loved Cyclops with X-Men, Captain America, the Hulk. All those I was kind of big on. So those are probably still the same. If I had to, I've always felt like they kind of screwed. I don't know how versed you are with Spider-Man, but in the comics, he went through a progression, where he started out in high school, kind of grew older. He ends up marrying Mary Jane Watson, and kind of it was going that direction. Well, at some point, somebody decided that they didn't want to do any of that, so they came up with this kind of dream sequence stuff that made it so that wedding never happened, and then they made him super rich. They had it for a while that he switched places with Dr. Octopus. It just got ridiculous.
Yeah.
So Spider-Man's still my favorite, but they totally jacked it up in the comic books. Now, thankfully, they're making up for some of that with the movies, and really good. But
that's the concept, though, with comic books, though. It's not really like one continuous story. It seems like it's a bunch of different universes. Like, I know there's comic books where Deadpool kills the whole entire Marvel universe. There's like where Wolverine, who's probably my all-time favorite when it comes to Marvel, like he gets his head ripped off by the Incredible Hulk, rips all his adamantium off his bones and stuff, the only way to kill Wolverine. And I'm like, there's so much like change. Like you can't, when you're reading a comic, you read a whole nother one, then it finds out like, oh, you can't connect the stories anymore. They're just alternate universes, like a different kind of.
That's exactly right. It's gotten convoluted. My son's favorite's Wolverine, so he's always loved him. And I've always said what kind of messed up, well, two things that messed up comic books. It's the first one was they started, instead of just having individual stories that were kind of self-contained, and then if you had another superhero guest star in the book, that was a big deal. But then what they went to was they had stories that ran through, they were like universal threats that ran through every single comic title that they had. So in order to get the story, you had to buy everything. Well, nobody wants that stuff. And then they had to keep upping the ante. If your threat is Thanos, well, what do you do next time to make it a bigger threat so people will still be interested? You have to keep upping the ante. So that was the one. And then the other one was Image Comics came out, which was you had a group of Marvel and DC writers and artists that were disgruntled over how they were getting paid. So they started their own company, really talented ones. Todd McFarlane was one of them. But when they started their own company, they killed collecting because they just flooded the market. Instead of releasing a smaller run of issues so that people are kind of, scrambling to get them. This is all before the internet. They just flooded the market. And those two things, I think really hurt comic book collecting. And then the internet came, and now, push a button, you can have whatever you want as long as you're willing to pay for it. You used to have to actually go and search. If you wanted, I remember the day that we finally got an Amazing Fantasy 15, which is the first Spider-Man, came into the store. That was a huge day for us. Now if you want one and you can pay it, just, go online and buy one.
Yeah. So who's your favorite DC then?
Nightwing. Always been a Nightwing guy.
Damn. All right. Okay. I haven't heard that one get tossed out at me before. I like that one.
I don't know. Well, I was Teen Titans guy. I was Teen Titans guy. So, I kind of, started out, he was Robin, but then when the run that I was reading was in the 80s by Marv Wolfman. And that's when he, Robin becomes Nightwing. And I was hooked from that.
My favorite DC comic, my favorite superhero from the DC universe is Green Lantern.
That's a good one.
A lot of people shit on the movie. Even Ryan Reynolds craps on the movie. But my original Green Lantern was Justice League Green Lantern. That was my original Green Lantern. That's where
which is another good cartoon.
Do you find it difficult, like watching a Marvel movie and like you see like an actor that played as another superhero playing as a new role? Like I look at Captain America and first thing I think of is Human Torch. I'm like, nah, Johnny Blaze, get back in the saddle, bro. Like, no.
Yeah, I think at first, I had that issue, but he played Captain America for so long. Eventually it kind of went away. Did you see that? The HBO streaming service is going to have a new Green Lantern show, like a live action show.
No, but I'm going to have to start looking this up now.
Yeah. It's that HBO that streaming stuff's Disney obviously theirs is pretty epic, but the HBO one you should check out because it's got a ton of properties on there and all the DC stuff I think is moving there. So the DC streaming service, all that's going to go there. And one of their flagship shows is going to be a Green Lantern show.
Since you've been kind of involved in like comic books and all this stuff since you were a kid, I wanted to ask your opinion on this. A lot of people bring up why Marvel and DC are kind of different ones are so popular depending on the audience, is depending on the realistic kind of storyline behind it. It seems like everybody in the DC universe develops their powers through a tragedy or some type of critical experience in their life. And everyone in Marvel kind of gets gifted with them or deals with like just a freak accident.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. That's pretty fair. It's now, of course, there's a ton of similarities, and both companies stole from each other, pretty shamelessly. If you pick a character, you can probably find an equivalent character at the other company. But I think as far as how they get their powers, that's a pretty accurate statement. It's DC also tends to be overpowered. I think their characters tend to be a little more powerful than what you get on the Marvel side, just as a whole. So some people like that. Some people prefer someone's a little more vulnerable, I think.
With Bruce Wayne or something, it makes it more relatable, I guess you would say, for people. I mean, not being the billionaire aspect, but just a kid losing his parents and then being in like he doesn't have any superpowers. He just has a lot of shit. You know what I mean? And he has
that's right.
An extensive study with like martial arts and stuff, but he kind of shows like the grim aspect of DC that always DC tries to capture. I know another one they try and capture with is Rubber Man. Not like they got the Fantastic Four, obviously, with Marvel, but like there was no tragic experience what happened there. They just got caught in a storm in outer space and they all came down with powers. There was no grim side.
Right.
But like
more of an accident.
Yeah. Rubber Man was like, oh, man, like he went through some crap. Like he was basically like, and I'm like, I definitely I like DC side of it because it feels like you can watch a lot of the good popular Marvel movies because they basically dominate the market when it comes to just producing movies because they have so many good superheroes that are kind of trending now in society. But like DC just shows a more like story-based thing, kind of makes you feel for the character before you get involved into the movie.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty fair. And that, growing up, depending on what time of life it was for me, I'd go back and forth. I was a Marvel guy all through my teen years. When I got a little bit older, I think the DC stuff was maybe a little more mature as far as the writing. So I got into some of that. And now, to the point with myself and Brett, my son, we're not just sticking with one character or one comic. We bounce around based on the story. So if it's a story that interests us, then we'll go to that comic. If it's if it's not too appealing or it kind of falls off, we just switch to something else. And that's different. Back growing up, I was just loyal to the comic, and I would buy that comic no matter what, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think it's fair with the DC stuff. I've always looked at their source materials a little more mature. I think what Marvel deals with a little more gritty. Maybe that comes from Frank Miller, starting the whole thing with Batman, and then you had Neil Gaiman, Sandman, all that type of stuff. I think they kind of delved into that sooner than some of the other companies.
Now, you do have your podcast with your son called Too Opinionated. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. Why do you call it Too Opinionated? Is it because you guys actually have like strong opinions on this, what you guys call geek culture?
Well, it is. It's that was a name that Brett came up with, and it's we're trying to there's a generation gap there. So our opinions on things, we match up on some things, but they tend to be a little bit different. And the fun part that we have with the show is we love to kind of argue that stuff out. So we'll both argue our sides and kind of go from there. But it's been a great bonding experience. The time that we get to spend together, and it's open. It's a true partnership. So we're free to kind of speak our minds, and we argue and we fuss at each other. So you get some of the father-son stuff. I get aggravated at him, because he gets distracted easy. And
that's when you just pull out like childhood stories of him. Like, remember, I changed your like diaper until you were like 15 years old, bro. Like, you still slept with a nightlight till you were in your 20s.
Well, that's exactly right. And we get into some of that stuff, and he'll, anything he can do to throw me off or embarrass me or, aggravate me or anything, he definitely does. We have a great time with it. And we try to also mix in, at least we put out 2 to 3 episodes a week. One of them is just us, and we place those on YouTube as well, so you can kind of you can watch them if you prefer. And then the other one we do interviews. So we'll interview through the course of the time when I was going to all these conventions, I met a lot of people, and so now through Facebook, I've been able to reconnect with all these 80s and 90s actors and musicians and comic book people, and we bring those on the show and do interviews as well. So we've had a blast with both of those.
That's cool with Too Opinionated, though. You guys have a generational gap there, because your superheroes, the characters that played them when you were kids, and like TV shows like the Batman TV show is going to be different than, like where he's looking at stuff and like I'm looking at stuff like Christian Bale is my Batman, not dealing with even talking about bringing up Adam West or bringing up, the original, like it's a giant generational gap. Like you hear like, who's your Spider-Man? And then everyone goes like, oh, Tobey Maguire. And then people nowadays are like, oh, Tom Holland. And like, whoa, like there is a giant difference depending on what you watched as a kid. It
really does make well, for example, I love the original Star Wars trilogy. That's what I grew up on. That to me, that's the story. Well, he was born in 99. So the closest to him is the prequels. So where a lot of people don't care for the prequels, he actually really enjoys them because that's what he grew up with, when he was younger. So we have that argument all the time over what's the best, Star Wars movie. And so it's stuff like that, because it's just a different perspective. You tend to like the things that you enjoyed when you were young. And that's just kind of the way it goes. I'm the same way. Everything that's the great thing about what we do and with Meisterkhan is everything on there it's on there because it was something that I enjoyed growing up.
Yeah, and it's crazy to see that. Like I've talked to so many people that are interested in Comic Con, this thing I really knew nothing about. I thought it was always nerdy, but I understand it just from people's explanation towards it, because it's a bunch of people getting together, dressing up like their favorite person that they idolize. It takes the time to escape from their lives and, put themselves in a place to be their favorite hero or be their iconic thing. And a lot of people give it a lot of flack considering it's a weird thing or something. I'm like, it's not, though. It's just a way of feeling, I guess, a better form of expression, being able to, like, just like video games is an escape from reality, being able to slip into a costume of your favorite person, and like the amount of work and effort that goes into it. Like they always tell my buddies, like, we're going to go to Comic-Con. It's like this thing. It's they do games, movies, everything that you could think of. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm like, so I was going to go as like a Skyrim character or someone from like Leonidas from like the movie 300.
Yeah.
Mostly so I could just take my shirt off and show a six pack. And he was like, he was planning on doing it too. He's like, dude, we're going to go as Spartans. I'm going to get really into the gym. I'm like, bro, I've been going to the gym every day for 7 years.
That's
now.
right.
Like it took forever to get this. You think you're going to get that in a month? He's like, I could do it. So he's like doing like fasting and all this stuff. I'm like, bro, I'm just watching him go through hell.
Yeah. It don't work that way.
He ended up going as some Naruto character. And I was like, all right, do it. Each is their own, dude. You're going to have a lot more fun. It's not about killing yourself to get there. It's about enjoying yourself and not like,
yeah, that's exactly right.
I've seen some great costumes. I've seen a guy that was way too big to be playing Master Chief, but his costume was on point. I've seen people that dress up like Transformer suits where they transform into a car. I'm like, holy shit. Like, it's amazing. And they say write a list and make sure you know what you're going to do when you go down there. It's like you write a list, but none of that stuff ever happens like you want it to. You end up doing so many different things.
That's exactly right. It's funny to see how popular those conventions have become. And Brett and I cover quite a few of them as we'll go as press and kind of cover show. We've got we're doing the GalaxyCon in Louisville, Kentucky this weekend. But it used to be, back in the 80s and the 90s when you go to conventions, I got to meet Stan Lee probably, I don't know, a dozen times. And you might have to wait in the line 5 or 10 minutes to get a chance to speak with him, but that was it. And if you think about it now, if you wanted to talk with Stan Lee, you better be planning on sitting for a few hours before you get a chance to get up there. And you're probably only going to get a couple seconds with him, and of course he's passed since then, but back then, it was just, we thought it was a pain that we had to wait 10 minutes, and then he might spend 10 minutes with you once you got up there. It was just, I don't know, just completely different time. Back then it was only hardcore comic book people. Now it's everything. It's science fiction, it's cosplay, it's the fantasy stuff. It's anime, whatever you want, gaming. It's all there. It's so big, and I think overall that's a good thing because it's brought all that stuff out where we can kind of all share it and enjoy it together. So I think that's great.
Do you think that from when you were kind of involved in this as a kid to where it's at now, do you think that it's pretty awesome to see how far it's kind of become and kind of been, now it seems like a popular topic? Because I talk about like it kind of feels like a lot of people are like, you never even know what that is, you're just doing it because it's a trend. But it seems like it's also sparking in some people to go and research like the original stories behind these heroes and find out the original stories. I know the only reason that Wolverine is my favorite superhero on the Marvel side was because I watched Wolverine Origins, which a lot of people didn't like, but I thought it showed a great aspect of that movie. I mean, I watched the original X-Men, but when Wolverine had his like kind of own movie in a way, I was like, whoa, like when they were, it showed the beginning scenes where it's him and his brother fighting through all these wars throughout history. I want to see a movie with his brother. Please bring that into the subject. Oh my God, a dude that runs on his hands and knees like a fucking tiger. Like, let's bring that
Sabretooth.
back.
Yeah. You want the Sabretooth, a very popular villain in the comic books, and I'd watch that, and that'd be pretty good.
We talk about superheroes being relatable. I think that's what makes them a very popular thing. I mean, back in the day, you used to idolize superheroes. You idolize people like my dad's a superhero or whatever. Now it's like I want to idolize celebrity, someone that is like not the best person to idolize. You know what I mean?
Right.
And like being a superhero and being relatable, it was because like with some things like Wolverine, like when he was a kid in the Wolverine Origins and it showed him getting his powers and his like family calling him a freak and stuff, his brother's the only one that understood him, and his brother was older, and they ran out and learned how to protect each other. Then the movie goes on. I have an older brother, so that hit very close to home with me. You fight with your family, you have your animosity over, oh, he took my toy, oh, he did this, oh, whatever, this thing, or someone's shouting for moms at some point, but that having that relatable experience, knowing that your family is always out there to have your back no matter what happens, made Wolverine a very adaptable character for me to get into.
Yeah, I think that's great, and it's that's the whole point is when you put a story out there, you're wanting to connect, and that's even though you're dealing with people that have these fantastical powers and abilities, you want to feel a connection with them. I think that's why Batman's so popular with a lot of people, because Batman, as you said, he doesn't have any powers. So you can envision somebody actually being Batman, and that's not as big a leap as, say, somebody that's exposed to gamma rays and becomes the Hulk. You can see somebody actually becoming Batman, which I think helps his popularity.
One thing about Batman, though, that tool belt has fucking everything.
Well, you got to be rich if you're going to be Batman.
I don't know where half that stuff comes from. I can see, he's fighting crime and stuff. Like I talked about before, he pulls out like a cheese stick out of his utility belt and just starts peeling the cheese stick. And like he's busting a criminal's like, "Can I get a drink of water?" Batman just pulls out a Capri Sun, then takes out a straw out of his utility.
He's got everything in there.
Like what else?
Shark repellent, everything.
It's like, what else do you got in there, man? I want you to look up there's a thing on YouTube called All Things Comedy. And there's a famous comedian named Pete Holmes. He does one called,
I know Pete. Yeah.
Yeah. He does one called Badman. And it's like a parody version of Batman. And they have this part where they're just trying to figure out his voice. And he's doing like a Scarface accent, like, what do you do? Like doing the whole accent and everything. And the criminal's like, that doesn't sound like you. Like, can you choose a different voice? So he's running through voices with them, does like a Morgan Freeman.
I'll have to look that up.
Then he does a Ray Romano.
Up.
Oh my God, dude, it's priceless. But like, I think that's awesome because like that helps kids like nowadays that are like always on YouTube all the time, help get into Batman, help like look up this original story too. And it's crazy to see how far it's become. And like we talk about superheroes connecting at home with a lot of people, which makes them so, I guess, influential in a lot of their lives where they go and get comic books and stuff. I mean, one of my very first podcasts with one of these guy that works at my gym, his name's Chuck. He became a bodybuilder because when he was a kid, he used to go to stores and get comic books and he used to draw the superheroes' bodies and draw superheroes out on comics and stuff, make his own. And he was like, man, you know how cool it would be to have a godlike body like this? And he got really into bodybuilding and became a professional bodybuilder. And that all stems from comics. And like I say, the relatable experience and also the interpretation and inspiration from superheroes creating such an impactful thing into someone's life. It's something that, it's where creativity truly lies, man. I'm telling you, there's something really, really deep about comic books too. Whether it's just a time to relieve stress or a time to kill some time, getting interested in a read. But it's all about like, you learn a little bit too along the way. It always tells a moral of a story.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah, that's a good way to put that. And I do think that I know in my life, comics have always been very influential, and I think that's the case with a lot of people. It's just different now because you don't have, most people aren't holding, a paper comic book and reading it. They may be reading the stories online or they're reading the trade paperbacks, that maybe, but it's just, the medium's different. But I don't know that necessarily matters. The content's still basically the same.
Just keeping the original basis. I do want to ask you though, if you had to pick one superpower, what would you choose?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Because you always want to think. You think you don't want to fly, don't want to be able to turn invisible.
You don't want to read minds, dude. That's the worst power. Everyone always says,
no.
Like to read minds.
You don't want that.
No, it's going to turn into freaking, what is it? God, I can't believe his name's slipping on me. He was in a movie where he could read women's minds.
Yeah. You don't want
Mel Gibson.
Yeah. What women want, I think.
Oh my God. Yeah. Imagine knowing like all those like power to read somebody's mind and never being able to turn it off.
Yeah. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. I don't know. With me, it'd probably be either speed or strength. I'd probably go with one of those just because I think it'd probably be speed. I think strength, you'd always have to be worried about, not keeping it under control and ending up breaking something or hurting somebody. I think speed be the way to go if I had to choose one. Flying would be pretty cool though, but with my luck, I'd run into a plane or a tree or something. It would be a disaster.
That's why superheroes shouldn't wear capes that fly, because you get caught.
That's right. Yeah, you don't want that.
I think for me, I would have to choose like another one of my favorite superheroes' abilities, Nightcrawler, the ability to teleport.
Yeah.
But it would suck if there was like if there was a would you rather on it. Like the only time, if you wanted to fly, the only time you could ever fly is when you're inside. So every time you just hit the roof.
Right.
And then like to do the teleporting one, you can teleport, but can only be once per like day. And so once you teleport somewhere, you can't go back until the day's over.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, Nightcrawler, I always enjoyed his character. And there was a time there they turned him into he's kind of a swashbuckler type. So, he fought with swords, and yeah, he's an interesting character. I always thought that was one of Marvel's better creations.
More original too, mostly because he was like a foreigner kind of aspect of the thing. You really didn't understand his whole like history or where he comes from, but he seemed like he grew up alone on the streets, that type of style, and like nobody really gave him the time of day. It really brings into the concept of Hellboy too, another one of my favorites. Not really a superhero, but more of like, I don't know, its own individual thing. I think it's the whole idea with the tail and all that. They kind of correlate in my brain, being kind of similar. But Hellboy, one of my all-time favorite movies, shows a more humanistic side with Ron Perlman, man, not the newer one.
Right. Yeah, no, I enjoy both versions in the movies just for different reasons. But, I've always enjoyed the Hellboy comic book, and that guy that did that, Mike Mignola, he did he did another comic book that became a cartoon, and it was the weirdest thing. It was I can't recall. It was something about something screwed head is the weirdest title, and it had Abraham Lincoln and like zombies and just all kinds of craziness in it. But they turned it into a cartoon, and it was actually really well done. That I just kind of brought that up because the guy, that guy that created Hellboy, his imagination is something, because he comes up with a lot of original ideas.
That movie you're explaining was literally talking about like this movie I saw with Sam Elliott. It's called The Man Who Killed Hitler and Shot Bigfoot.
Oh my gosh, we talk about that on the podcast. That is the best movie ever.
It's too much stuff in one movie. Like in the title, gosh. What's a good name to title this movie? How about The Man Who Killed Hitler and Shot Bigfoot? You're like, perfect.
We always make that joke because, like, I kept pushing. I was like, you got to watch this instant cult classic and stuff. And my cousin called me, and he's like, "What's the matter with you?" He's like, "That's 2 hours of my life I'm never going to get back." It's like, that movie is terrible. And I told him, I was like, maybe you're not understanding the concept. I was like, did you get that he kills Hitler, and then a little bit later he kills the Bigfoot? And he just wasn't having it.
You just got to sit for Sam Elliott. My favorite cult classic is probably Big Lebowski. I love that movie.
Yeah, I'm a Tombstone guy, but Big Lebowski's awesome. But yeah, I think, we talk about that some on the podcast too. It's cult classic movies. What usually makes them, in my opinion, cult is they have to have quotable lines. And Lebowski, Tombstone, those type of movies, you could just sit and quote them all the way, which makes it fun and interactive. And that's usually, I think, what creates that kind of cult status.
Damn it, Donnie, you're out of your element. Dude, when I watched that movie, I got super into bowling, and I every time I go to a bowling alley, I think of The Big Lebowski.
Yeah, it's such a good movie. The characters in that movie are just unreal. But and it's one that anytime it's on, I'll sit down and watch at least a little bit of it, because it's that's the fun stuff. Holy Grail is kind of like that. I don't know if you've seen that one. But
I have, yeah.
That's a good one to kind of sit and quote. So. There's a bunch of them.
There's definitely a lot of good stuff out there in the world. I'm glad a person like you has a podcast and a website that kind of focuses on everything that kind of evolves into this culture that a lot of people think they know some bit about, but if they want to look up more of it, they can find it too. So I really want to give you,
That's exactly right.
I really want to thank you for being on the podcast, man. I really want to give you here a minute at the end to kind of promote your content, tell people about your website, tell people about like where they can find your awesome stuff.
Yeah, man, we really appreciate you giving me a chance to come on here. I've enjoyed it. You know, I was excited to speak with you. Love the show. Yeah, people can find us. There's a couple of easy places to find us. They can go to Meisterkhan.com is the website. Meisterkhan.com. Or they can find us on Facebook under Meisterkhan. And then we've got a Facebook page strictly for the podcast. It's called Meisterkhan Pod. They can find that on Facebook. They can find us on any podcast app or on the website, Meisterkhan.com. They can find Too Opinionated. Check out the show. I think they'd really enjoy that. Or if they want to watch the video version, we have a YouTube channel that's under Meisterkhan Pod on YouTube.
Yeah, you always want to be the Meister, not the goat. Let's bring back.
That's right.
I'll bring out the Meister, dude.
Yeah, I fought for that title because back when we were little, everybody wanted that. I was the one that I just stuck with it, and eventually, over time, everybody else gave up on it, and that I took it.
Well, you definitely have the title in my eyes, man. I'm bringing that one out for sure.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been a blast. I've enjoyed that. We'll have to return the favor and have you come on our show sometime soon.
Right on. Anytime, any day. I'll be there. Thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank podcast, and stay tuned for the next episode.